YouTube because I'm using Google, so
There we
it
go.
seems to be working. Yep. So I'll see if the comments are. I can't see any comments yet. Hello. Hi, this is Blacked Out Ewoks, and we're joined by Action Figure Grader today. So we're going to be talking about the wonderful, wacky world of Star Wars bootlegs. So got quite a few questions, and hopefully once I've gotten through my questions with Action Figure Grader, you can ask some questions. So if you type question at the start of your comment, then I'll know it's a question and I can ask Action Figure Grader. So I've got a few questions here.
All right, man.
I haven't got any. Hi. There's no comments yet. I mean, I guess give it a few minutes. Yeah. So, yeah. So I've got about 20, 30 questions that will cover the whole. Oh, here they are. Yeah, we've got comments. So got. Hi, Gerard.
Hey, Gerard.
Hi, Boss Bounty. So.
Hey, boss. How are you, man?
Great. So great. So I'm going to start the questions. Are you ready?
I am ready. Let's do this.
Okay. So first question is what would you consider to be a Star Wars bootleg?
That is a question that gets asked quite a bit in a lot of the Facebook groups. Hey, Lee. So there's two kind of schools of thought. There are bootlegs, and then there are knockoffs. And for me, what I consider, and I want to preface everything that I talk about here by saying that I am not an expert on bootlegs. I just have a lot of bootlegs. There's a difference between having a lot of bootlegs and knowing a lot about bootlegs. And I am not an expert. The bootleg group on Facebook, those guys are experts. I've been trying to learn over the last few years from those guys, but what I consider to be a bootleg, a true vintage bootleg Star Wars figure, would be available only in countries where the licensed figures were not available either because of politics or because of poverty, import rules, whatever, license rules. So places like Mexico and Argentina, Brazil, places like that where it's probably more poverty related than politics related, versus places like Russia and Poland where the Cold War was in full swing. And U.S. products were not allowed there. So those countries created their own mimicked figures to replace those for fans of Star Wars that lived in those countries. So that's what I would consider to be a bootleg. Knockoffs tend to veer more towards either copycat that have images that are very close, that closely resemble but don't exactly. You know, guys with a smock on that looks like Luke Farmboy with a ray gun, things like that. There's lots of cool knockoffs that were also available in the 70s and 80s, but they weren't trying to basically mimic the licensed figures. And so that's what I consider to be the difference. But that's something that does come up quite a bit.
That's a great answer because you sort of answered my last question as well. So Model Trem would be bootleg from Brazil. The lead figures.
I would consider those to be a bootleg. Yes. The Model Trems down in South America, very rare.
Whereas the sort of Chinese product, like the Power of the Force 2 cards with you know the sort of almost miscard and the figures that quite resemble the Power of the Force 2 figures there'd be knockoffs.
I would see, you know, that's a good gray area one, for example. So there's a Star Wars group devoted to those run by a gentleman named Stephen Weimer, and he is a big collector of those. And he considered those to be bootlegs. To me, they're more like knockoffs, but I think it just depends on what you're looking at. But that's a good gray area in my opinion, because they basically have the same look and feel as the Power of the Force 2 line. With the same kind of similar card backs with kind of less detailed paint apps, things like that. I would call those a knockoff personally, but if you ask Steven, he would probably vehemently, he'd want to murder me.
But whereas the Chinese, you know, they sort of knocked off the Black Series, like the Boba Fett figure, and it's very hard to tell from the original. That's a knockoff.
That's a knockoff. Yeah, they're trying
yeah.
to pass. They're basically trying to pass as a Black Series figure.
Yeah,
and so that's a good example of what I'd call a knockoff.
Okay, great. So brilliant. So first of my original questions would be, what would you consider to be some of your favorite bootleg pieces? So say maybe your top 5 pieces.
Oh, that's a good question. So a little background on me, I in general collect graded vintage Kenner and foreign variants of Kenner figures, Star Wars figures. And because I collect graded figures, I tended to not really collect bootlegs. I will say that once I became more aware of UKG, the graders in the UK, and collector archive services and some of the things they do, I became more interested in, because I like the idea of getting a vintage bootleg as opposed to a modern knockoff of a fake bootleg, getting it authenticated and having that as part of my collection. At that point, I became more aware of the very expensive and very rare bootlegs, such as Turkish bootlegs made by SB Products, Uze Turkish bootlegs. And I was like, wow, so there is a massive market of very rare bootlegs out there. And this is several years ago. And so I decided to explore them in more detail several years ago. And I decided that I wanted to start small. So I started with Polish bootlegs early on. I found a gentleman, a gentleman named Lucas, who had a lot of 3rd generation Polish bootlegs, which came out in the mid 1990s. So they tend to be in better condition. They tend to be less expensive, and so I started with those. And I was like, okay, I can get 10 really cool mint true bootleg figures it was about $100 for 10 of them. And I sent them off to collector archive services once I kind of became aware of them. And that kind of got the ball rolling in earnest. And I started getting more into other countries and learning about them. And I would caution anyone that is thinking about getting into true vintage bootlegs is to take your time with it, because there are many fakes out there. I get questions all the time from folks saying, is this a true vintage bootleg? And I say, no, it's not. It's a modern custom. So in terms of my favorites, I pulled down a few of mine. I think my favorites tend to veer towards the Polish, only because I love the color schemes. They're so wacky and they're so diverse that there's almost an unlimited collectability to the Polish figures. And so, you have, I'm just pulling up random ones that I had next to me, but you have, like, this is a 3rd generation. Sorry, I'm working on my camera here. This is a 3rd generation Imperial Gunner.
Nice.
And so a good way to start if you're a beginner. I love these 3rd generations because the colors are so pretty. But for every black one that looks very close, that mimics very closely the licensed Kenner figures, you might find 10 other colors. And so that's what I really fell in love with. And obviously Boba Fett is probably one of my favorite characters, as I'm sure he is for a lot of folks. But so this is a 3rd generation Boba Fett. Yeah. And early on, I made the mistake of overpaying for a lot of them. But to answer your question more directly, I think my favorite bootleg that I own is probably this one. And we've seen this before on my channel, but this is an overstock 3rd generation Boba Fett that has been assembled. All the arms and legs are still on the factory sprue, unpainted, just absolutely gorgeous. I bought this from a gentleman in Spain, and it's just one of my favorites. I love pre-production and post-production items like that kind of tell the story of the factories closing down and things like, you know me, I have plenty of really Lettys like that. So that's probably one of my absolute favorites. I've found many others over the years that you've seen on my channel, such as the Ortet Bost figures that are quite rare, that I got great deals on some of them. So a lot of it's just the memories associated with searching for them. And, with bootlegs, it's not like the kind of thing where you can go on eBay and say, hey, I want to get a an overstock Polish Boba Fett unpainted with the factory sprue still attached to the arms and legs. It's just it's such a rare item that when I see something like that, it's the search that I remember. And some of these I've searched hours and hours for. Hours. Yeah. The Boss bootlegs that you guys have seen on my channel, I probably spent for one of them, the orange one, I spent probably 50 to 60 hours trying to track down various sources on a lot of the Rebel Scum, the old posts on the Rebel Scum, just everywhere. I mean, eBay sellers. I mean, just asking anybody and everybody I can find for some of these, and when they actually arrive, it's like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I finally found this. So it's more about the search than it is the actual having the item. In some cases, it's just the memories associated with that. So
yeah, you've answered more or less my second question, which was about the appeal of Star Wars bootleg. So for me, I'd say garish colors, grotesque approximations of vintage Kenner figures that derived from a psychedelic nightmare. Their uniqueness and the sort of exoticness as well. So I mean, it's stuff that's from every corner of the world. Well, Eastern Europe, Turkey, Mexico. So and has that. Like you say, that it's all the joy of the hunt and not knowing what you're going to find, and stuff that you can't even imagine. So no,
that's exactly right. I mean, look at this. This is a squid head, right?
Yeah.
A clear squid head. What a bizarre figure. But the fact that the bootleggers took the time to make the accessories, the belt, the cape, and the bootleg weapons. Yeah. This was a party. This is apparently was given out in bags as party favors to children in Mexico during the 1980s. Just little freebies that kids would get at the end of birthday parties. Yeah. And now these go for many, many hundreds of dollars. Wow. The other point I do want to make is that Star Wars collectors can be cliquish, and elitist. Yeah. And what I did find by joining the Star Wars Facebook bootleg group is that there's none of that. Certainly, I'm sure there's some cliques and some egos and things like that. But when it comes to learning about it or asking questions that they probably think are stupid, nobody made me feel stupid. Nobody thought that any questions that I asked were dumb. I learned so much in the course of about 2 years from the administrators and some of the senior members in there, and they freely give their information away without coming across as arrogant or elitist. And that was the other big attraction for me, is that most of my you and others are certainly folks I've met outside of the bootleg group, but I've got several friends in the bootleg group that are now lifelong friends that I would do anything for, that I'm not sure I would have met if it hadn't been for the bootleg group. So that's the other big attraction for me, is the community aspect of it. Yeah. Is that, and oftentimes if I see an item that I want really bad, but I know that there's a buddy of mine who's been looking longer than me for that item, I'll buy it and reserve it for him. Wow. Without even asking him, because I know he wants it, and now I'm talking like $200, $300, $400 items, but I know that, and I can't reach him. I'll say claim, I'll get it for him because I know he's been looking for years for it. And, I'll take that risk because I've known these guys for many years now. And it's just so hard to find some of these items that you might not see another one come up for another 4 or 5 or 6 years. So, yeah.
Okay. Brilliant answer. I mean, you're going through my questions or preempting my questions pretty well.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So any of you that are viewing, put your questions and we'll answer them at the end, hopefully, because I think we're going to get through this pretty fast. So third point is, what I find astounding is the value of some of these figures, especially the Uzes, which I guess are the most famous of the bootlegs. What advice, and I mean, you did give some advice already, that would you give to someone thinking about wanting to collect bootlegs, and what area of bootleg collecting would be affordable and realistic. So you suggested, where would you say to a newbie, what area would you say to start collecting in?
No, that's a great question. I think that the risk for quote unquote fake bootlegs, which is, I don't know if that's really a word or not, but the risk for fake bootleg figures is very minimal with Polish bootlegs. So that would be, and it's fairly affordable. You know, some of the first generation and more rare colors can be quite expensive, but in terms of starting out, Polish bootleg, I mean, you can get a great third generation AT-ST driver for $20, and that's a great way to start. You know, and that would be where I would start. Where I would have the most caution would be with Mexican bootlegs. Any of you who search on eBay know all too well that when you type in Mexican bootleg Star Wars, you'll get a flood of modern customs that are repackaged on reprinted cards made with swirly plastics and very, very poorly made, and but similar in mold to the actual vintage bootlegs. So I would have the most caution for new collectors of bootlegs with Mexican bootlegs, because it's very difficult to tell apart a 1980s from a 1990s, and sometimes they blend together. I just posted a video yesterday on ones I bought that could easily, some collectors would classify them as early 1990s, some would classify them as late 1980s, and they're probably about the same. So you got to be really careful. But there's some where I've seen them, try to be passed off as vintage items, and they were probably made 6 months ago. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to tell the difference apart from them. So I would have the most caution with them. For those with deeper pockets, Uzes will continue to skyrocket in value. A gentleman just listed a mint on card example, AFA 50 of an AT driver in the bootleg group, and I think he wants about $13,000 or $15,000. So those are for the deep pocketed. I do have several Uzes. They are overstock or loose graded, but that's about as far as I'm going to take it, obviously, given my budget. But there might be folks who are watching this right now who have deeper pockets. Everyone's got a different budget, but those I would be very careful with. I would make sure to get ones that are authenticated. I have seen many Uzes for sale on eBay that have had repairs or glue or paint touch-ups, and they're not being disclosed, and they would fail. You know, they would not pass AFA certification. So it's very dangerous, I think, with bootlegs to make sure to know what you're buying. And me personally, don't make the same mistakes I did where I jump on items because I think I'm never going to see them again. For the most part, you can find plenty of delicious bootlegs, and not worry about, okay, I've got to have the most rare color, I've got to have the most rare figure. There's plenty out there, and just know your budget. So
well, I've made mistakes because obviously with that carded Bossk Oritet, and you helped me with. You found out that it wasn't kosher, and then the Yoda that was, carded as well, and that was real. So
that one was definitely real. Very nice one too.
So, I mean, you've more or less pointed out how you conduct research into a piece that you are unsure about. So you'd go to Facebook groups, and obviously the knowledge you've acquired over the years, you'd use that to help you make a decision.
Well, I got a perfect example for you. This happened yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So somebody in the Facebook bootleg group posted a baggie of what he called a vintage articulated Han Hoth bootleg, a Mexican bootleg Han Hoth. Now, I know just a little bit about it. I know that there is a vintage one, but when I saw this, I had no shame. I don't have an ego. I very quickly tagged all the administrators of the bootleg group and said, "Can you guys help me out here? This, from what I heard, this is a fake. This is a modern custom. Can anybody help me out here?" And even with that item, there was disagreement as to whether it was legitimate or whether it was made 6 months ago. So the bootleg market is very difficult to authenticate in some cases. and you got to be really careful with what you get. So
yeah. Number 5, what bootleg pieces would you say got you the most excited when you knew you had won them?
Oh gosh, I would say that there's a couple in my collection, and I didn't pull them down, but I can if you want me to. But for example, I had a first generation Boba Fett Polish bootleg,
Yeah,
and I bought a unarticulated Stormtrooper bootleg from a guy in Germany, an old 65-year-old guy in Germany.
yeah.
And unbeknownst to me, he included a first generation dark blue blaster.
Wow.
Those blasters are extremely hard to find. I mean, it can go for a couple $100 easy, but he threw it in $80 purchase. And so when I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is, and so I did have the experts take a look at it and double check it. And then about, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months later, an unused first generation Polish bootleg card back came up on eBay. And so I came up with the idea to put them all together. You guys have seen it on my channel. So I've got an unused Polish bootleg card back. I got an unused, a first generation Boba Fett and a first generation blaster. So all early generation Polish, and I had Collector Archive Services assemble it together to make it look like a mint on card, which I have seen and would probably fetch, $15,000 to $20,000 minimum. But to have one that kind of mimics that look, it was kind of a lot of fun to put together. And it took about a year, so it took some patience, but that was one where I got really excited when I got that card back, and I knew that I finally had all 3 pieces to assemble something like that. That was a big win, and it was not break the bank expensive. I mean, it was, I think altogether for all 3 items, it was certainly not cheap, but given what prices have done since then, it was a very satisfying and rewarding project. So
yeah. Okay, so next question, we're going to move on to because we've covered a lot of what I was going to ask with the all the different nationalities and the main types, which are the Uze, Oretets, Polish and Mexicans, and Chinese, of course. The Oretets of Russia are quite an interesting set of figures. Can you please tell us how you acquired your Oretet collection? Perhaps some history of Oretet also?
Yeah, that's a great one. And Oretet bootlegs in general, I think, are very underappreciated. And I hope that folks will take the time, if you get into bootlegs, to take a look at the Russian Oretets. Number one, you can build a beautiful collection of Russian Oretet bootlegs for not very much money. The vast majority of the Russian Oretet bootlegs came out in the mid to late 1990s. They're based on the Power of the Force 2 molds. They concentrate on Yoda, Darth Vader, Chewbacca, Bosk. So those are the 4 main. The earliest of the Oretets came out in the early 1990s, and that focused on the AT-AT driver. Yeah. And this is the silver AT-AT driver.
Wow.
And
90.
a fairly 90 plus. This is one that I got from a gentleman in Russia who offhandedly said, I've got this one, and it's got the gun, the original gun. He reached out to me on Facebook and said, I'll send it to you. And I was like, this is never going to happen. There's no way I get this one. And sure enough, about a month later, it showed up. But so that's where Oretets started, was kind of early 1990s with that silver Russian AT-AT driver. And then as the Power of the Force 2 line came out with the licensed Kenner figures, they started to mimic those 4 characters. So that line is really not that expensive. So, for example, I have the Chewbacca's. I've got all 3 color variants, as well as an overstock still on the factory sprue. And you guys have seen this on my channel.
Yeah. Wow. Magenta, gold.
Magenta, gold, and like a reddish color.
Yeah.
And then the overstock. But the great thing about this item is that excluding the grading costs, which was not cheap, but just the figures and the overstock piece alone, I probably spent maybe $70. So you can get, that's for all of them together. So you can get a nice set of Oretet figures for relatively inexpensively if you wanted to, loose. The carded figures are becoming a little bit more difficult to find, and you do have to be careful with those because there are recards out there. You need to look on the back for the excise tax or state tax.
Yeah.
And it'll have a 2003 date stamp on the back.
Yeah.
So that was how I acquired those. The Boss figures, again, were very lucky finds. One of them was a 2 a.m. Insomnia purchase of the metallic green. Somebody listed one in Russia on eBay about 2 a.m. my time. I couldn't sleep, and I just happened to catch it at the right time. The orange I did find from a gentleman on Facebook who sent that to me, and there was some negotiating there, and I had to haggle on price, and I paid quite a bit for that one. But they just kind of fell into my lap. I'd love to say it was some kind of skill, but the orange one took some time finding the right person. The green was just luck. So
great. Okay, Polish bootlegs. I mean, they're quite confusing for the casual collector. Why?
That's a great question. So the Polish bootlegs, there is a very wide range of lines for the Polish bootlegs. There are first set static bootlegs that came out in very, very either the late 70s or even the very, very early 80s, and they were limited to Han Solo, Chewbacca, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I believe a Stormtrooper. I could be incorrect on that, but there are some articulated and unarticulated very early ones. Those go for many, many hundreds of dollars, if not thousands. Wow. The ones that we're most familiar with are the first generation articulated bootlegs that are based, for the most part, either on the TIE Fighter arms and legs or the Biker Scouts arms and legs.
Yeah,
it can be, if you have a very mint first generation early 80s Polish articulated bootleg, it can be hard to differentiate that between a third generation. But the arm sockets in general will be cone shaped. They fall out really easily. I had a Darth Vader that I bought, and literally I barely pulled the arm and the arm came out. And if you see that cone shape for the socket, then that indicates it's most likely, well, it definitely is a first generation. But the second, where I get confused the most is with, for example, your AT-AT drivers.
Yeah.
Trying to tell between a second generation articulated, which came out around 1990-ish, and a third generation, which came out around 1994. It's very difficult for me to tell the difference, and I still sometimes can't tell the difference that well. There was a great book written by Jacob Brzezinski that goes into great detail on the history of Polish bootlegs. He has since sold out, but for those of you watching, if you ever have questions, you can reach out to me, and I've had many people do this. If you have questions about a certain Polish bootleg, you can reach out to me by Instagram or however, and I'd be happy to try and answer the question if I know the answer. But the Polish bootlegs to me are very early on. I didn't know as much as I do know about them now, but I feel like I'm still learning. There's still so many color variations out there. You guys saw my Polish farm boy Luke. That took so long for me to get one because he's in such a demand. And the color schemes, my buddy Lee, who I think is watching right now, he showed me one of a bright pink Ewok Polish bootleg.
Wow.
And those kind of color combinations are so difficult to find. And that's where most of the value now, I feel like, for seasoned Polish bootleg collectors is finding those kind of crazy, wacky colors, color combinations to add to your existing collection.
Brilliant. That's the next question answered as well, because I was going to say that, like, the endless paint variations. That, I mean, if you got one, would you try and get other variations of a figure? Like, I've got those 3 attack commanders that are, drivers, sorry, that are sort of paint variations.
Right. Yeah. To me, I don't necessarily try to collect every color or things like that. There are collectors that do that. Like Lee, he's got 10 of every color, or 10 colors of every figure out there. For me, for example, I've got like 7 Polish bootleg Luke X-Wings. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
collect 7, but for whatever reason, I just happened to have, 75 to $100 at the time when one came up that looked really nice. I was like, well, I don't have that color, so might as well add that one. And next thing
Yeah.
I know, I've got 7 of them. So I don't do it purposely, but there are collectors like Lee, for example, who do try to get the wild and wacky color variations. But I've got maybe 5 different characters where I've got 3, 4, 5, 6 colors of each of them. And it's just fun. It's fun to see them lined up and how much they change, especially within the same generation. So, for example, like a 3rd generation figure or character, one month they might, somebody showed me some factory notes from one of the Polish factories, Evenplast, I believe was the name of the factory or name of the city. And they showed me some of the notes from within the factory where the employees were meeting to decide on the colors for that month that they were going to paint a certain figure. And then the next month, it might be a different color combination. So they very purposefully changed the color schemes up, I guess, to create multiple purchases within, Poland at the time period. But it's interesting. It's interesting to see how that plays out in the market and how many, you might see a very, very commonly, a Luke static bootleg that's gray, for example. You might see 10 of those over the course of a year for sale. But then, Lee, for example, he found one that's like a clear white. That's the first time I've ever seen one before. And it's really cool to see those kind of wild combinations that just pop up like that. The longer I collect Polish figures and see the amazing collections out there, the longer or the faster I can spot one where I know that's a rare color combination. And that's what gets me excited now. Now that I counted my boots. This is totally off subject, but somebody asked me about a week ago, how many graded bootlegs do you have in your collection? I counted them up, and between all the different countries, I have 192 graded bootlegs right now.
Wow.
That is the definition of insanity. I don't need that many bootlegs. So my buddy Chris, for example, he's a massive fan of Prune Face for whatever reason. I've got two 3rd generation Prune Faces. Like, I'll send you one. You can have it. I don't need 2 of them. I don't need 4 of them or whatever I got. So, but now when I collect Polish bootlegs, it's more about getting those rare color combinations. And for the most part, I try to only get 1st generations now. I've got so many 3rd generation bootlegs. And I'll make exceptions. Like, for example, I got those 2 AT-AT drivers. One of them was bright pink. He had a bright pink chest apparatus and hoses. And I love the pink ones. Because you never see those, So I was like, okay, I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you can say, "Oh, I can just concentrate on 1st gens now," rather than me. I'm happy with anything that comes along. Okay, next question. It's painful for me to talk about, but can you briefly describe the Hungarian bootlegs, and do you have any?
Okay, that's a really interesting line. I've seen some absolutely amazing carded ones that have sold recently in the Facebook groups, and I'm just salivating thinking about getting a carded one. But the Hungarian line, and I'm going on memory here, so apologize if I mangle anything. But the Hungarian line, I believe, I'm going to double check. I think it was 86 or 88, somewhere in there. 87. So I was right. It was right between. So 1987 was when the vast majority of these came available in Hungary, and I believe there were 11 of them. I'm going to go on memory. I'm not going to name them all, but you got Han Solo, you got Leia, you have Luke Skywalker, you have C-3PO, R5-D4, Darth Vader, Boba Fett. That's 7 of them, but I know there are others. But they're an interesting line because they're so fragile. The plastics that they used, typically the thumbs break off. You'll see a lot. Biker Scout's another one. The thumbs break off. They did come with interesting bootleg accessories though. So for example, this Luke does not have his accessories, but he came with a Bespin style blaster and like a green saber. Leia came with a very a blaster that very closely mimicked the the license figure. But they came on such gorgeous card backs with a blister that was stapled on. You'll often, not often, but you will see them qualified grade. There's a Wicket also is another one that you see commonly carded, and it's an interesting line. It's fairly expensive. Chewbacca is another one that comes with a bowcaster, and you'll see them come up either with or without accessories. And without accessories, you can find a fairly mint one for, I'd say $100 to $150 depending on the character.
Wow.
One Han just sold recently for about $100, and it did not have the accessories though. Where the money is in the accessories. So the Luke, for example, to get a saber or the blaster combination, you could probably spend double what you would spend on a mint figure, and it's very difficult to find the accessories for those. And my buddy Jim, he has almost the entire run. He's got every one of them except for Boba Fett. He saved the most expensive for last. A mint Boba Fett with the accessory, you're probably close to $2,000. And so he saved that one for last, but he's got 11 or however many there are. He's got all of them except for Boba Fett, including a carded Leia that he just got that was gorgeous.
Wow.
So it's a line that is small. So if you're focused and you save up your money, you can get a nice full run of them fairly easily. But it does take some patience.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Okay, so some call it Turkish delight. What can you tell us about SB products and Uze? What are some of the very famous Uze figures, and what is the significance of a 1970s calculator?
That's a great question. So the SB Products was the company in Turkey that made a small line. I don't remember the number, but a small line of bootlegs. And what I think, number one, they're fairly rare because they were made in Turkey, but the quality of them is almost on par with a licensed figure. They're just gorgeous, gorgeous figures. Their card backs, though, as you allude to, are quite interesting. And for example, the Imperial Gunner came on a card back that had, instead of having the controls of the Death Star, they used a Casio calculator or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Here is a mint Uze.
Wow.
And this is an 85 grade. He does not have the weapon. The weapons can go for double what the figures go for. But this is probably, in terms of one where I really splurged and probably overpaid, it was this one. But he is mint. He came back with an 85 grade. But 1988 SB Products Imperial Gunner. And the card backs, like you mentioned, are extremely, extremely wacky. And mint on card figures, the bubbles are super fragile, so you'll usually see those graded with blister support. The most famous of all of the Uzes is easily the Blue Stars, which is the Hoth Stormtrooper that came in a very bright blue.
Yeah,
I've almost pulled the trigger on one that was that did not have the accessories. And you're ungraded, but in mint condition, you're probably $1,500 to $1,800.
Wow.
Fully assembled, with all the accessories in high grade, you're probably going to be talking at least double that. I'd say probably closer to $5,000. And for a mint on card example, you can triple that easily. It's probably more like 25 or 30, I would think. But I haven't looked at prices recently. I believe there's one that just sold in the Hakes auction that was a mint on card, but I could be mistaken. But that's probably the most highly desired, just given the color differences.
Yeah.
But the figures themselves were very, very well made. You don't usually see bad paint apps. You usually don't see any kind of sonic weld issues. The one that's the most difficult to actually find in mint condition is easily the Death Star droid. The Uze Death Star droid, that usually the chrome has worn off significantly. And it's just one of those figures that if you find one, the only ones I've ever seen in many years now of looking at those Uzes of the only ones I've ever seen of the Death Star droid, they've had almost no chrome. It's very, very difficult to find one of those in high grade.
Yeah. I'd have thought the Headman as well. That's another one that would be highly sought. headband.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The headman is probably, you're right. I mean, it's either the headman or the Blue Stars. You might be right that the headman with accessories would probably even go higher than the Blue Stars. The headman is basically a royal guard, and he came with like a sword and a shield, and he was black and he had a chrome,
head.
or excuse me, a gold head.
Yeah.
Somebody just listed a sword and the shield, and I think they wanted something crazy like $11,000 for just the shield. I mean, it was just crazy what accessories go for. Crazy.
Okay, great. So now we're going to move on to Mexican bootlegs. After we've gone through my questions, we're going to answer your questions. So because we're flying through my questions.
Okay.
So first question about Mexican bootlegs is, how far do Mexican bootlegs go back? And yeah, answer that one then. Yeah,
that's a great question. To my knowledge, now I'm not very well versed on how early they started, but to my knowledge, they appeared in the early 1980s. Some of the longer time collectors have some examples, though, of very rare Mexican bootleg Bosks and Snaggletooth and Luke X-Wing that might predate that. They might come back, they might be in the late 70s. But if I had to guess, most likely in the early 80s, 80, 81, 82. The Mexican bootleg market is just so fraught with danger that you never know when you're looking at a modern custom versus a vintage. But I've seen some examples by some of the big time collectors in the bootleg group of things like Snaggletooth, which you'll never see anywhere, and there might be less than 10 examples out there. Or like that Luke X-Wing. I saw a fully articulated, or maybe it was just semi-articulated Luke X-Wing. I've never seen that before, but it was a Mexican bootleg of that. And for the most part, though, the line varies between semi-articulated and static bootlegs. There's several different lines of just kind of, it's almost like a really hard rubber mold of a static bootleg. So this is a Luke Bestman, for example.
Yeah, very nice.
That's just a static bootleg. These have since come down quite a bit in price versus what I paid for them. But what I find interesting is that most of the longer time bootleg collectors don't really like the Mexican static bootlegs, and they tend more towards the semi-articulated bootlegs. So what I've seen since I've started collecting the vintage 1980s Mexican bootlegs is that the price of static bootlegs has, dropped through the floor. And when I first started, an item that might be $400 like that, the Luke Bestman, you might be able to pick up one of those now for $100, $150.
Wow.
So the market for that has really gone south. But the semi-articulated bootlegs, the ones that have some movement in the limbs, have gone way up. So a Reese, for example, a Reese static bootleg might be $150 or $200. You can double that or triple that for an articulated bootleg.
Yeah.
But of all the lines that were, at least in the short time that I've been collecting, of all the lines that in terms of valuations, unless it's a super rare example, like a very early Hoth Stormtrooper or some of the others that I've mentioned, but some of the more standard Mexican bootlegs, the prices have come way down. They've come way down. But you do have to proceed with caution with those.
Yeah. You've more or less answered my next question. So I think you brought it up because I said, can you really distinguish between bootlegs made in the 80s, 90s, or 2000s? As I doubt if any records were kept as to what was produced. Were certain pieces manufactured through the decades? What I'm trying to say is that categorizing Mexican bootlegs is like trying to bring order to chaos.
No, that's absolutely, you hit it right on the head. The only way that I have been able to identify bootlegs in Mexico is either by paint apps or by the mold of the figure. So, you can show me a Mexican bootleg Darth Vader, and it might be an early to mid 1980s, but based on if it's got a more stylized look or stylized paint scheme, then I know it's going to be a late 80s or most likely a 90s, depending on the sculpt. But the later kind of what I tend to call artistic customs that are fairly modern, 2000s and later. Those are usually fairly easy to spot, either based on the mold of the figure, how, you know, if it's got injection marks that very clearly uses technology that was not around in the 80s or even the early 90s. Paint swirls in the plastic, that's not something you usually saw in the 1980s. So that usually indicates also that it's a modern custom. And there's ways to spot it, but some of them, the fakes have gotten so good by a lot of the customizers down in Mexico that I almost hesitate. The other telltale sign, for example, like Boba Fett, for example, a vintage Boba Fett 1980s Mexican bootleg can go for $1,500 plus. But the problem is the modern customs look exactly the same. How do you tell the difference? Well, it's usually a sharper sculpt. If it's a very sharp sculpt around the belt area and the chest area, that usually indicates that it's a 1980s. But it can be very difficult to tell the difference. And I usually default to asking one of the experts in the group when I have a question about something. But I haven't, quite honestly, I haven't bought a Mexican bootleg other than one. I did get one static squid head that I've been looking for forever from a trusted friend of mine about 5-6 months ago. But that's the last Mexican bootleg I bought in a long time, just because I'm so fed up with trying to tell the difference between a vintage and a modern custom that I've just kind of put it on hold.
The Mexican bootlegs have some of the most lurid colors and slapdash paint jobs of any bootleg figures.
They do.
Do you agree? Do you agree? Yeah,
I do. One of my favorites is probably this one. This is a necklace, a Yoda necklace that has got a hole around the
head.
The head that so kids could wear it as a necklace. But what I like about this one is that the color scheme is fairly standard. He even has the bootleg accessories, bootleg cane, bootleg utility belt and snake and cloak and things like that. So that's one of my favorites in terms of, and it's semi-articulated also. That's one of my favorites in terms of my Mexicans, because it does closely resemble. But then I have, people can go back and look at my channel. I've got 4 Bib Fortunas, and they're all bright blue. And it's just a really cool mold. And, I really enjoy, certain characters and certain paint apps and things like that really pop. When someone walks into my collection room, they could care less about a double telescoping Luke. They don't know what that is. But when they come up to like a bright blue Bib Fortuna bootleg, they're like, what is that? I don't remember that being in the line. And that's when you can really kind of talk more about bootlegs. So they tend to be conversation pieces for me. And I'm trying to get away from them only because it's starting to take over my collection room with the bootlegs. So they're a lot of fun though. And it's just like you said, there's just infinite possibilities and infinite collectability depending on where you, what kind of collection you want to start. So,
I know that you are often frustrated by the subpar labeling that AFA, CAS, and UKG have used to label such bootlegs. Why do you think such grading companies have often mislabeled bootlegs?
Well, I think that's a great question or a great topic. I think that it's very difficult, number one, to authenticate. It's very difficult to tell eras apart. We just talked about the Polish first, second, third generation. I mean, it takes an expert, I think. I think that's why you see AFA no longer grading Polish bootlegs unless they are super rare, like the deluxe set with Reis and Gamorrean Guards. Very select, high value bootlegs AFA will grade. Collector Archive Services, to their credit, has become much more accurate with their bootleg labeling. And have avoided a lot of maybe some of the early mistakes that I found on their website. And it's just a very difficult gray area between different groups of bootlegs, genres of bootlegs, countries of bootlegs. And so, it's just not, it's an imperfect science that will never be perfect. But I find that because they have the interest in bootlegs has grown so much over the last however long, and it's becoming less and less of a niche and more of a, maybe a side focus for some of the larger collectors out there.
Yeah.
Some of the high dollar collectors out there that see Uzes and say, wow, that is amazing and super rare. And they only get into it maybe because of the rarity, maybe not because of the love of bootlegs. But I think because of that, that's probably dragging the grading companies up a little bit in terms of their knowledge base. So I give credit to all three. I mean, really all three grading companies. I've seen bootlegs recently on eBay and elsewhere graded by all three of the companies, where I've been like, wow, that's a great label. That's a great label. And I'm impressed that they got it right. And so it's just such a niche area that I think it's going to take some time. So.
Okay, great. Last question from me. Then we're going to try and get through some of the questions from the comments. So as this is a niche area of collecting, it's rather surprising how valuable bootleg pieces are. Certainly the Uzes, Hungarian and rare Mexican pieces can command huge amounts. Would you say that bootleg collecting is in its infancy, or is it a well-established area, or is it the so-called middle ground? So what I'm trying to ask, do you need plenty of money to get in, or can you astutely put together a decent bootleg collection? Like, I'd say you have done that. So
that's a really great question. The administrators like Joe and a few other guys in the bootleg group, I mean, they've been collecting these since the early 1990s. So for them, this is old hat. I mean, they've been doing this for 30 years. For someone maybe like me, who is fairly new to the bootleg community, I don't have those kind of deep pockets to get those carded Uzes, for example. And so it is possible to put together what I consider to be a fairly sizable and varied and diverse bootleg collection without breaking the bank. You can break the bank. You can. Whether it's in its infancy or not, I don't think it's in its infancy, because prices are such for the rare ones. Prices are such. I think the cat's out of the bag. But I think personally that more collectors may get into them if they get tired of the license figures. Like for me, I just hit a wall. I hit a wall with variants, license variants, and I wanted something different. And so I've kind of taken a bootleg break now, but I'd say for about 2 years or so, I was only buying, for the most part, bootlegs, because they were just so different, and it just tells a different. There's an important, in my opinion, there's an important history to the bootlegs of Star Wars that I think people should know about, and I'm hoping that more people will discover it, because it's the Kenner history, the Palitoy history. We all know that. If you're a collector of Star Wars, licensed Star Wars figures, everyone kind of knows that story by now, if you've been collecting long enough. But the bootleg subcategory of Star Wars figures, it just tells the story of what kids were playing with in those countries that were either too poor or the politics didn't allow for the licensed figures to get there. And I personally think that if you're a big collector, if you got a big collection, everyone should have at least 1 or 2 bootlegs in their collection, in my opinion, just to have a side story for folks to talk about.
A bit of variety. Well, with me, I'm totally unfocused. Like I've
me too.
Carded modern. I just can't foreign stuff from all over the place, and then I got into the bootlegs as well. So I'm totally agree with you that you need at least 1 or 2 bootlegs. So okay, so we're gonna try and sorry
go ahead. Sorry, you go.
I was going to start going on to the comments.
We got to wrap up soon, I assume. So let's do some questions. Okay,
so Gerard Coyle asks, question, where is most expensive bootleg in existence, John?
I wish I knew the answer to that, but I would say that the more I think about it, I think your answer is the right one, the Headman. The Uze headman is probably the most expensive. A true, Uze headman royal guard with the gold head and the shield and the sword would go for many thousands of dollars and would probably blow the blue stars Uze Hoth stormtrooper out of the water. So that to me is probably it. Whether that's true or not, you'd have to ask the experts on that one.
Huh. This is a difficult question to ask. It comes all the way from Sweden, and it comes from someone called Grot Grossen. I saw a Luke Farmboy no limbs mold being sold at a Swedish action site. I think this must be a Hungarian figure. It seems like he was cast from an original figure because he had a lightsaber slot in his arm. Any idea what that could be from?
Well, it most likely is just a modern custom, but I would encourage Grot, if you're still watching, I would encourage you to reach out to me on Instagram at Action Figure Grader and send me a private message with some photos. A lot of collectors do that, and I can take a look at it. I'm not personally aware of any Luke Farmboy. Oh, well, you know what? I take that back. It could be this one. Maybe this is what he's talking about. I don't know. I'm assuming he's talking about something like this, which is the first generation. Yeah, this is probably what he's talking about. If this is what it looks like, Grot, then you're looking at a static, unarticulated Polish bootleg Farmboy. This is the only one I can think of that has the saber molded into his hand.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a modern custom. So I forgot about that one. I don't know why. I just got it back and I've already forgotten about it.
Next question. If you had to choose only one to collect, John, license or bootleg? That question's from Gerard as well, Coyle.
Hey, Gerald, I think that's a great question. If you'd asked me this a year ago or 2 years ago, I probably would have said bootleg. I think that because my tastes changed so much that I might answer this differently a year from now. I don't know. But I think right now, if you'd asked me what my answer is, it would be licensed. I love the between vintage collection and modern prototypes and vintage first shots and licensed variants and all the foreign card backs. That's probably where I am now. Now, ask me a year from now, that might change.
Yeah. Next question. Let me see. What Gerard again? What's the earliest and latest recorded figures classed bootlegs of any origin known, John?
Oh gosh, yeah. I'm not the man to answer that, but I think that for me that it has to be the late 70s. I know that based on reading Jacob Brzezinski's book, there were some very early first set Polish bootlegs from the late 70s. They think they're not positive, but they think Obi-Wan and Han Solo, for example, Leia, those three first set figures are extremely expensive. Chewbacca. So those in theory date back to like 79, somewhere in there. That's probably the earliest. Latest, I mean, you can look at the Ortets. I mean, those came out in the 2000s. So you can classify modern stuff as bootlegs if you want to, but I think because I consider bootlegs to be from countries where they're no longer, you couldn't get the licensed figures. So I think anything modern nowadays is just more of an artistic custom.
Okay, next couple of questions. So this one's from Salacious Rum. Hey guys, where is the best place to buy bootlegs?
Great question. I think that I've gotten the fairest deals in the bootleg Facebook group. It's a great group of guys. I don't know how the admissions process works these days because I've had some friends try to join that group and they can't get an answer. So proceed with caution and proceed lightly when joining the group because it just maybe reach out to me first if you decide you want to join that group because it's gotten a little tight with who they let in there and who they let post stuff because there's been so much modern customs for sale in there that they're very careful about that. But the Facebook group, the Deal or No Deal group on Facebook, eBay is, when people think eBay that stuff is overpriced, that's not necessarily always true with bootlegs. I would change your search functions to search in Poland or search in Russia or search in some of the other countries. You can change it manually as to which section of eBay you search. And oftentimes you can find in like the Polish eBay many beautiful bootlegs at auction that you wouldn't have normally found if you're just searching under your own country's search function.
Okay, so probably our last question from Boss Bounty. Question says, would you sell an actual vintage high ticket item such as one of your DT Lukes to fund a bootleg?
That is a really, really difficult question, Tim, and thank you for asking and watching. I think it would depend on the item and what my mood was. I mean, right now I would say the answer would be no, but if I had the opportunity to get at a very fair price, like a blue, like I think the only bootleg I really want right now is an Uze's Blue Stars. That I would love to have one. It doesn't have to be complete, but I would like to have one. And there have been a few that have popped up where I almost pulled the trigger, but I mean, it's just so expensive that that would be the only way I think I'd be able to afford one, would be to sell some of my other items. So that's a good question. I think the answer is probably no right now, but like I said, ask me in a year, and I might be back on bootlegs and back on trying to find some of these rare ones.
Okay, great. So it's 9 o'clock now, so I think we're going to end it now. So thanks for watching. Thank you for Action Figure Grader.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah.
Thank you for hosting. It was a lot of fun. An hour flies by with you. I don't know what it is. Your questions were on point, and I hope that we that you and I educated the viewers. But this would not have been nearly as interesting in my mind had the questions not been so well thought out. So
yeah, and I can vouch for Action Figure Grader. He's helped me buy stuff before, so he's given me good advice. So, and he's always willing to help people. So if you ever want to get into bootlegs, get in contact with Action Figure Grader on Facebook or via YouTube. You could leave a message maybe, and then he's always willing to help. He's helped me, but like with those free ATAT drivers and bits and bobs. So anyway, so I'm glad you came on this show. And this is the first time I've hosted as well. So
yeah, I enjoyed it, man. I feel like I talked way too much, so I hope I didn't step over your questions too much. But I really enjoyed it, and we got to find a new topic for the next one. So
yeah,
can we end on? Hey, I don't know if Tim's still watching, but can we end on one note?
Yeah,
I want to. So Tim, Boss Bounty, here is.
Oh wow.
This is the modern miss card for you, Tim.
That is so nice.
Mandalorian on a General Lando card back. That's for you, Beautiful. Boss Bounty. And it came back with a 90 factory miss card. So I just wanted to tease. I just wanted to tease you and let you know that I did put together a video, and we'll take a closer look at it. But man, it's nice to have that one back finally. So.
Okay, great. So thanks everyone for watching. Goodbye. We're going to end the broadcast.
Thanks for watching, guys. We'll be back soon. Thank you.
Toodle pip. Cheers.